Begin this bulletin tonight, however, in London, where a court there did continue to hear a case in which Somalia's largest remittance company, Dahabshil, is seeking an interim injunction to stop Barclays from closing its account through which it sends money over to Somalia. Now, Dahabshil is taking Barclays to court after the bank said it would withdraw its services in a move that could take up to a year to go to trial. Our UK correspondent Natalie Ferry was at court. She filed this report.
At the injunction hearing in London, Dahabshil said that for Barclays to close its account without justification was unlawful because it is the biggest provider of accounts to remittance companies in the UK. But Barclays' defence argued that as a commercial entity, it was entitled to close accounts by giving a 30-day notice period. The bank decided to scale back its provision of services to remittance companies globally in a bid to comply with regulations, after HSBC was fined $1.9 billion for breaching anti-money laundering controls. While the judge weighs up the arguments put by both sides, Dahabshil can continue to operate.
Of course, the judgment has not been reached. We are very confident in our case. We are very happy to inform our customer, those Africans that are watching the program, who live in the UK, international community, Oxfam, United Nations, others who support it, that we are open for business. They can continue use the Dahabshil services anywhere they like.
A win is vital for the remittance company. It has opened an account with Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank for its corporate clients, but has not been able to open an account that would help the Somali diaspora send money to their relatives. Development agencies warn that cutting off this vital lifeline could lead to a humanitarian disaster in Somalia.
One of the things that we've been asking Barclays to do is to extend the service that they're currently providing for Dahabshil and the other 3 money transfer organisations that they closed a couple of weeks ago for a further 12 months. And that window, that extra 12 months, is going to allow the UK Treasury and the government to put in place a safe corridor which will give banks the confidence to resume their servicing of these money transfer organisations.
In the meantime, whether Dahabshil's account with Barclays will remain open is now in the judge's hands. The judge will now take a few days to reach his decision on whether to grant an interim injunction to Dahabshil. This would mean Barclays could not close the money remittance company's account until its competition claim has gone to trial. Barclays has said that if an injunction is not granted, then 2 days after the judge's verdict, it will close Dahabshil's account. Natalie Ferry, CCTV, London.
Right, on to the biggest story over the last couple of weeks. US Senate leaders on Wednesday reached an agreement to reopen the government and protect Washington's battered financial standing by heading off fears of a technical default on its debt. Now, sources close to the matter say the deal under discussion will fund the government until the 15th of January next year. It would also raise the debt limit until February 7, 2014 to avert a possible default on US debt obligations for the first time. And the deal, as agreed, will set up budget negotiations between the House and the Senate for a long-term spending plan, and that's likely to include a provision to strengthen verification measures for people who are seeking government subsidies under Obama's signature healthcare reform law, the Affordable Care Act. Now, like quite a few people around the world, you're probably wondering, what is this hullabaloo all about the American debt ceiling about? Well, CCTV's Anand Naidu explains all the problems that would have been created if the debt ceiling had not gone up.
The United States is one of only 2 democratic countries in the world where the executive branch of government requires approval from lawmakers to borrow more money. The other is Denmark. So what is the debt ceiling?
Well, the debt ceiling is the capacity of the United States to borrow money to fund its activities, from the space program to Social Security checks to road building to financing the military. So really the Congress has already voted to expend money, and the debt ceiling is simply a recognition that we're going to borrow the money to cover what Congress has already spent.
The United States Congress has raised the debt ceiling 78 times since 1960. Denmark, incidentally, raised its debt ceiling in 2010, the only time since adding the law in the 1990s. The U.S. Treasury normally wants the debt ceiling raised when it believes it will run out of money to pay the country's outstanding debts. So does that mean that the U.S. spends more than it earns and is effectively bankrupt?
The United States of America is not broke. the federal government is not aligning what it spends with what it's taking in. That could be fixed easily. It could be fixed, for example, if people that make over $100,000 actually pay Social Security taxes. They don't pay anything on that extra, so higher taxes. Or cut back on expenditures, or raise the retirement age on pensioners. All these things, relatively minor fixes, but hard to do politically.
If the U.S. Treasury fails to increase the debt ceiling, then the bonds issued by the U.S. Treasury will lose value. Borrowing costs will get higher as creditors demand higher interest rates. The whole world is watching this closely. A U.S. default will impact other economies, and if those countries start faltering, then they won't be able to afford U.S. goods and services, and that could hit the American export market especially hard. Anand Naidu, CCTV, Washington.
Let's get you up to speed with the latest events in this developing story from 3 different perspectives. Daniel Rangers is live in Washington, D.C., Miriam Bemard is in London, and Angelo Coppola is in Johannesburg, South Africa. Daniel, of course, the Senate was in session just before we came on air. What's the latest there?
They're still in session. They're still discussing matters. There's a question over the sequencing. A deal has been reached by senators, but there is the understanding that the House of Representatives, which has to approve the deal, has also basically given the nod to it. If the House of Representatives, which is meeting in about an hour and a half, decides that they want to vote first, then that will speed up the process, and we might not have to go too late into the evening before it is signed by the House of Representatives, it's voted also by the Senate, and then goes to the President's desk, and finally everybody can breathe a sigh of relief. There have been plenty of surprises along the way with this, but it looks as though the Republicans have basically stepped back from the brink. It has been a monumental game of chicken between the Democrats and some of the Republicans. The problem for the Republicans has been that public opinion has gone down about 20%. So the Democrats look like they've come out of this with a major victory, and also it's clear that no one now is willing to go to the brink and put the US government in default.
Indeed, Miriam, the S&P 500 in the US has posted gains over the last 16 days. European equities have broadly followed suit. Has there been any damage to African equities or fixed income instruments denominated in the US dollar, or base their pricing rather on American treasuries, due to this delay over the last 16 days?
It's difficult to tell right now, Rama, although no one can actually determine the ripple effects. Policymakers are treating this similar to perhaps measures taken after the Lehman Brothers collapse, trying to see what contingency plans could be in place just in case we see perhaps more delay. The IMF was warning even earlier that many African economies will start losing access to financial support soon. The question is, have they already? The idea is that contingencies have actually been in the works for the past 6 years to help central banks cope with these sorts of delays in financial backlashes. Just last week, central bankers actually would have had a chance to discuss the debt ceiling with the U.S. Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke during the IMF meetings. Also, because of Europe's debt crisis, the U.S. Fed actually extended swap lines with many central banks, like the ECB as well last year, allowing them to actually borrow in dollars from the Fed and then auction at home. At the same time, though, trillions of dollars in capital flows are backed up by U.S. bonds, a traditional safe haven, and this is a major wake-up call.
Indeed. Angelo, you are, of course, in one of those bigger markets. The JSE Top 40 Index has gained about half a percentage point or so in the last 16 days. Has there been any fallout, however, on the Rand or South African bonds?
Well, there is a bit of pressure there because there is a potential structural risk that we're seeing and hearing about, according to an analyst I spoke to. So whenever there's market volatility, as in any country in the world, the Rand bonds and equities do take a bit of strain, and there is a bit of uncertainty. So there is a possibility that there might be long-term damage being done here at the moment. But I mean, bear in mind that some of the traders that we've been speaking to have kind of said to us that it's been 104 times that this debt ceiling has been adjusted since 1917. And one of the traders suggests that perhaps not having any US government news for the last 16 days has been rather refreshing. Rahman?
Indeed, Daniel, however, let's focus on the nitty-gritty details of the deal as proposed in the Senate. Formal borrowing authority going on until the 7th of February and government funding until the 15th of January. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's the deal that's on the table. And on top of that, there is one concession, as it were, to the Republicans, which is the idea that anybody who receives government subsidies for Obamacare will have their income means tested, so they will have more scrutiny on their income so that there's less chance of fraud. On top of that, there will also be the convening of a Republican and Democrat commission looking at the long-term budget issues. Let's not forget that the American Congress has not been able to pass a budget, so continuing resolutions are a short-term fix. There is definitely a move afoot to try to at least pass a budget, but also look at some of the long-term structural issues related to healthcare costs spiraling out of control, and the fact that the US government is not able, it continues to borrow money and spends about 10% of its income just on borrowing costs alone. So these are the questions moving forward. And secondly, I think when it comes to January and February, there will be another test of whether Republicans are willing again to go to the brink for the sake of their own political views.
Indeed, Miriam, let's look at exactly how those risks are being priced in. This, of course, is a deal that only covers the next 3 to 4 months. Could we be back here again in the first quarter of 2014?
You know, many on this side of the pond are concerned that that will be the case. Exactly as Daniel was saying, it's about those long-term structural changes that we need to see. There are provisions that have to be put in place now, at least that's what many EU officials are thinking, through the short-term deal to actually ensure that we don't see another delay. The expectation is on an agreement to extend that debt ceiling, of course, till February, but after 3 months, we want to see some sort of reform provisions, perhaps all in the bills causing these, in the bills that are actually causing these divisions. The big threat for Washington is if foreign investors and national governments become so spooked that they start cashing out of U.S. bond holdings rather than that sort of traditional rollover process. European officials haven't made any indication that this would be a measure to take place, but staying with the theme of this deadlock, nothing's off the table with investors and central banks.
Indeed, nothing off the table in Europe, Miriam says. What about you, Angelo? How are South African markets pricing in the possibility of another standoff in January and February over the exact same issues?
You know what, Raman, I'm not quite sure, because what's happening is the traders that we are speaking to are kind of taking this with a bit of water like off a duck's back. It's not having any impact. They suggest that perhaps there might be some long-term damage, but if this does happen again in the first quarter, as we've seen now, money is flowing into the South African bond market. It's been steady. It's not been a lot, but it's been coming here for the past 2 weeks. So it's likely that there might be some bond inflows into our markets if we're back where we are or where we were a couple of hours ago. So it's a bit of a give and take at the moment in that regard, but bottom line is, it's business as usual here. The main issue for South Africa is that the continent or the economy is already in a bit of a downturn. So any more negative news is going to just add pressure to the confidence levels of investors looking at the country again.
Indeed.
Raman?
Thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there for your perspectives. Angela Coppola in Johannesburg, South Africa, Daniel Rangers in Washington, and Miriam Bemard monitoring the markets over in London. Now, let's move on to East Africa, where the Kenyan Association of Women Business Owners is calling for proper implementation of an affirmative action clause in the country's constitution, which reserves by law up to 30% of all government procurement contracts for women and other disadvantaged groups, like the youth, for example. Now, collectively, those contracts are worth about $2.4 billion. According to the organization, the implementation of these affirmative action clauses for women-owned businesses in Kenya is being held back by several challenges. And key among them is how the law is being interpreted by various government bodies. Here's CCTV's Peter Okaba with the explanation.
Just what is the number of women in business in Africa? How much are their businesses really worth? How many people do they support? Many questions with no answers because In reality, no one really knows. This apparent lack of clarity on the status of such businesses is just one of the myriad challenges facing women in business in Africa. This is one of the reasons behind the creation of the Kenya Association of Women Business Owners. While there are not that many or even actionable statistics on women in business and enterprise on the African continent, what is clear from the outset is the fact that these individuals and their businesses require a lot of affirmative action and support from the outset. The grouping of women business owners is now lobbying the Kenyan government to live up to its promise to reserve up to 30% of government procurement for women and other marginalized groups. The reserved contracts are estimated to be worth over 200 billion Kenya shillings, or about $2.4 billion annually. According to the organization, supporting women-owned businesses usually has a positive impact on the rest of society and the general economy.
For us to even realize the MDGs that have continued to be a challenge, for us to realize Kenya's Vision 2030, for us to be a significant player within the East African community, you cannot disenfranchise a constituency called women. They must become actively engaged in society, in their national economies, so that we can raise better families, stronger communities, stronger societies.
Global investors already find Africa a hard place to do business. Red tape, the high cost of power and the quick infrastructure are some of the often quoted challenges. These challenges increase exponentially if you happen to be a woman. In some countries, this has meant that governments have introduced affirmative action for women to level the playing field and encourage greater participation by them in government procurement. In Kenya, the creation of a Gender and Equality Commission over the past decade has somewhat helped the situation.
I believe in this country, when we're talking about equality, we have women who can do big businesses. And we want them to be allowed to equally compete with the men at that level.
Stakeholders, though, admit that the limited success that affirmative action for women-owned businesses has had has been due to the differing interpretation of the law pertaining to inclusion and how this has been implemented. One such example, the fact that the Kenyan Treasury has limited the size of businesses that can benefit.
At National Treasury, what they have interpreted this provision to apply to is only those women, youth, and persons with disability-owned businesses that have less than 10 million in annual turnover a year.
Businesswomen hope that with a review in current regulations, they may be able to pursue large government contracts and thus have a greater impact on the Kenyan society. Peter Akaba, CCTV.
In the meantime, Kenya's head of state Uhuru Kenyatta has reiterated his government's stand that 30% of government contracts will be awarded to the disadvantaged. The president made those comments when speaking at an ongoing Youth, Women and Persons with Disability Summit in the capital, Nairobi. And he said the constitutional provision for affirmative action would be closely observed. Now, he proposed to personally supervise the effort to ensure that intended beneficiaries do get their dues.
I will monitor myself. Not just the issue of 30%, but I will also want to know how many women and how many youth, in terms of physical numbers, have actually been given this opportunity. So that we are able to actually see, in terms of real numbers, how many people have managed to take advantage and to benefit from this particular initiative.
Just about 1/4 the top of the hour. Let's move on to our first break. We're talking about turning trash to electricity. Lagos State in Nigeria is pioneering a unique new project that could be a model for cities elsewhere in the continent. Welcome back. Over in Nigeria, the Lagos state government has embarked on a waste-to-energy project that's generating electricity at a demonstration centre in the country's commercial capital. Now, simply put, the project takes organic waste in one end and produces electricity on the other. With the details, Here's CCTV's Jitu Ibrahim.
Lagos, one of the world's largest cities, generates tons of trash every day. Most of it ends up at the Osolusun dump site, creating a health hazard and contaminating the environment. But the city has come up with a way of improving on waste management that will see garbage turned into electricity, something the city desperately needs. Official estimates put the city's population at around 21 million people, who produce about 10,000 metric tons of waste every day. In the same day, the city will get a bare few hours of power, forcing many inhabitants to rely on diesel generators. The Lagos Waste Management Authority is working on a project to generate power using methane extracted from rotting fruit waste that's then turned into latent power. The authority plans to have a 25 megawatt capacity in the next 5 years.
Gas is building up over a period of time in the digester. Also, you will have digestates in there in form of organic compost, like a sludge. Over a period of time, you could actually open up here and collect the sludge. This is also good for as a fertilizer for the soil and for plants.
About 45% of the city's trash is made up of organic waste. Converting it into something more useful and cleaner for the environment is long overdue. Among other benefits is that methane is a greenhouse gas 25 times more potent than the carbon dioxide emitted by burning it.
Energy is in demand, waste is a headache. So there's a link between the headache and the demand. So if Lagos is able to convert more of its headache into that demand, then it's kind of bring out a smart city program. You know, the city becomes smarter, and there's a kind of a resilience that you introduce in the city programs. And that's exactly what Lagos is looking at.
Traders at the Ikosi market say the project will help clean up the local plantain markets and also enable them to switch off their generators when the power comes on.
I feel happy because, you know, to make fruit, so the fruits can turn to gas and bring us lights. Yes, I feel happy and we enjoy it more than, you know, now we are buying fuel for 100 naira per liter. I thought this one would be better than using petrol.
The Lagos state government plans to bury the Osolusun site in dirt and transform it into a green park with grass and trees built over it in the future. Pipes in the ground will harness the methane bubbling underneath for the power plant. Jitu Abraham, CCTV.
Also in the Togolese capital of Lome, young tech enthusiasts from Togo and Benin are hard at work building computers, or rather reassembling them, from discarded scrap metal. Now, the project aims to provide computers at relatively minimal costs, as CCTV's Susan Mongeli explains.
Doing it the WoLab way. In this US-style Fab Lab, anyone who wants to tinker with computers is welcome to WoLab, which is a word borrowed from a local language meaning doing it. They use Jerry, a computer that doubles up as a server and is made up entirely from recycled material. It operates on Ubuntu derivative software running on the open-source Linux operating system.
Jerry, c'est un ordinateur.
Jerry, this is a computer that mounts itself with recovery equipment in a container. When I say recovery equipment, it refers to scrap business, the kind of computers that are no longer in use. We look instead to see what is good and what to use, processor, train, and all that we get into the can.
In the workshop, each participant learns to make Jerry together with other Jerry clan members alongside their counterparts from Benin and Togo. Upon completion, each one of them should be able to have the acquired tips to make his or her Jerry computer.
It gives me more from research I've done. Previously, I did not know I could get a computer in a container. We thought it was necessary to buy it. Or you could use the recovery to make yourself one, and cheaply.
With the mission of ensuring that the Jerry computer is made locally available, the Jerry Do It Together is the latest project from WoLab's founder Semne Kofi. Its aim is to open up and democratize knowledge and digital technologies by promoting computer models that are open, horizontal, and reusable, at the same time creating awareness of environmental and social issues. Susan Mungeli, CCTV.
Right then, quick run through the markets for you today. As Angela mentioned a little earlier, quite a bit of general indifference really, especially to what's going on in the United States. The Nigerian All-Share Index ending the day higher, only marginally so. The JSE All-Share Index in South Africa also ending the day higher, up 0.26 percentage points. The All-Share Index in Nairobi, the 20-share index rather, my apologies, in Nairobi, however, ending the day lower by 0.2, and the Egyptian market, of course, will be closed for most of this week. That's business for you at 17:54 GMT. On to the sport now.
Rama, many thanks indeed. The sport coming up next.